Okay, hey guys. Today I'm going to take you through another model answer because a few people have been asking for a couple more of these. So it's an AO2 answer, 15 marks. The content is Year 1 Christianity, the God topic, and it's about the Trinity. So the statement we've got is the doctrine of the Trinity does not make sense. Evaluate this claim. So I'll take you through each paragraph, and again, with 15 markers, the focus doesn't need to be on just saying what you know. The focus needs to be on having the argument. So I'll hopefully be able to point out a few places where I'm using this kind of evaluative language that you want to get into your work. Okay, so paragraph 1. On the one hand, it could be argued that the statement is true because the doctrine of the Trinity can be confusing and unclear. The concept of God as 1 in 3 and 3 in 1 can seem complicated and can undermine the idea that Christianity is a monotheistic religion. On the face of it, this may seem like a strong argument because to say that the Father, Son and Holy Spirit are all God while simultaneously claiming that there's only one God does feel contradictory and confusing. So you can see what I've done there is I've made a point about, yes, the Trinity might be unclear. It might be confusing because is it one God or 3 gods? But then what I'm going to do in the next paragraph is I'm going to show that actually it's not a very strong argument at all, because a Christian who thinks a little bit more deeply about it will be able to tell you that actually, even though it's not supposed to be 100% understood, it's still a good way of thinking about God. So here's how I do that. However, it's easy for a Christian to respond to this by arguing that the Trinity is not supposed to be fully understood. It is a divine mystery, but this does not mean that it's not useful in understanding God. A Christian might point out that God is transcendent and unknowable, so the point of the Trinity is not to tell Christians everything about God, it's to tell them something about God. And for that reason, it does make sense and it is useful. So in this next bit here, I'm going to do my own evaluation of that point because that's what you need to do. I am inclined to agree with this point of view because the concept of Father, Son and Holy Spirit as persons of the Godhead is not contradictory to Christians. It explains how God acts in the world in different ways. So a lot of people think that evaluating is just about giving your own opinion. And I mean, it is and it isn't, because what I think about the Trinity doesn't really need to be a thing in this essay. If you look at what I'm doing, what I'm agreeing or disagreeing with is ideas about whether the Trinity makes sense, not necessarily whether it's true or false. So you've got to bear that in mind. It's sometimes more subtle than you realise. Okay, let's move on. So I'm using moreover to start the next paragraph because I'm building on the previous point. If I was changing to a different point of view, I'd use however. Some people use those words a bit interchangeably, and you want to avoid that because they don't mean the same thing. Okay, moreover, many Christians would argue that the doctrine of the Trinity does make sense because it's part of the teaching of Jesus. He was trying to give a clear message to his followers, and therefore he would not have done this in a way that was confusing or hard to understand. In the Great Commission, which comes at the end of Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says, "Go and make disciples of every nation, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." This suggests that Jesus saw himself as part of the Trinity, so this helps cement a Christian's understanding of it by relating it to Jesus' life and teachings. That little bit of Matthew there, the Great Commission, if you haven't learned that quote, I would definitely learn it and have it in your locker because it works on a number of levels and it will work in a few questions. So if you've got a question about baptism, it would be a great one. If you've got a question about mission or evangelism, it works for that. And it works for this as well, because this is Jesus essentially naming the Trinity, the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit. So if it's important to Jesus, it's important to Christians, and therefore it does make sense. But I'm going to switch back to the other side of the argument, and you can see a clue that I'm doing that because the next paragraph starts with however. However, this argument could be undermined by the fact that we cannot absolutely know that Jesus said this, or that he meant for Christians to understand God as a Trinity. Matthew's Gospel was written many years after the events it describes, and we can't be sure that Jesus said these words or intended this meaning, which again introduces confusion. I can see why this may be a problem for some, but for Christians who are happy to put their faith in the words of the Bible, this criticism will not carry much weight, because they're likely to accept Jesus' words even if there are historical debates about their accuracy. So my point here is that we don't know that Jesus absolutely, factually, historically said anything that's recorded in the Gospels. The Gospel writers could have embellished it, they could have not recorded it correctly, they could have been told things that never happened. There's all sorts going on there. But for Christians, mostly they wouldn't care about that, because if it's in the Gospels, they would regard it as authoritative, simply by the fact that it's there. So it's the best record we have of Jesus's words. Many Christians are happy to go with it. So again, what I'm doing there is I'm saying, yes, this is a point, but actually Christians wouldn't care very much. That in itself is evaluation, thinking about what's the value of these arguments. That's where we get the word evaluation from. Okay, next bit. Against the statement, it could be argued that the Trinity absolutely makes sense as a model of personhood. The perichoretic relationship between the three persons of the Trinity, and I've defined perichoresis or perichoretic there, mutual indwelling, models to Christians the reality of God's love, which inspires Christians to demonstrate this love in their own lives. For many Christians, this is a powerful aspect of the Trinity, but it can be criticised with the argument that humans can never replicate or emulate God's love, and therefore we're back to a confusing concept of God that doesn't really guide or help Christians. So again, I'm going to switch back and do the other side. A Christian could easily counter this claim, though, by pointing out that the Trinity helps Christians understand important aspects of Christian teaching, such as the atonement, the idea that Jesus was sacrificed and paid the price of sin to bring about reconciliation between God and humans. If Jesus was not truly God, and the Trinity is not true, this teaching has no meaning. Therefore, many Christians would say that not only does the Trinity make sense, it's crucial in making other aspects of Christian teaching make sense too. So you might be thinking, oh, this is higher level knowledge that I don't have. You probably do have it. It's just about using it in the right way. So the thing that I always say about the Trinity when I'm teaching it is, on its own, it's a little bit confusing and you might think, what's this for? But actually, when you start applying it to other bits of Christian theology, like the atonement, like the resurrection, it actually helps to make them make sense. So if it's doing that job, then we've got to sort of draw the conclusion that, to Christians at least, it's a coherent teaching. Coherent means it makes sense. Okay, finally, conclusion. And I hope you notice, like with all conclusions that I write for 15 markers, it's not just a sentence. It doesn't want to be a sentence. It wants to be a paragraph at the end. The other thing I'll say, and I'm sure I've said this before, conclusions are far more important than introductions, because a conclusion will prove that you've answered the question, but an introduction won't. In conclusion, I would argue that the statement is not true. It seems clear that for Christians, the doctrine of the Trinity does make sense, and to say that it doesn't comes from a misunderstanding of what it is and what it means. Christians are not claiming that the Trinity gives full knowledge of God. Rather, it's a way of understanding different aspects of God in the world, and a way of understanding complex aspects of theology, such as the crucifixion and atonement. If the Trinity was understood as three gods, then it would not make sense in a Christian context, but this is a misrepresentation of the doctrine. Whilst I agree that the Trinity is a mystery and can never be fully understood, I would argue that it certainly makes enough sense to give Christians a useful way of speaking about and understanding something of the nature of God. Okay, so that's my essay, 789 words, and I did do that in time conditions, so I did that in 27 minutes. It doesn't have to be that long. I can produce quite a lot in 27 minutes. because I've had a lot of practice. If you feel like yours is a bit shorter than that, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine, because you could still get a very high mark for a shorter essay than this that didn't make all these points. But what I definitely would make sure that you do is evaluate the claim. Don't just write down everything you know about the Trinity. Remember, this is an argument. This is not just a description of your knowledge. And make sure that you have a good, strong conclusion that comes down on one side or the other for the statement. It doesn't have to be totally binary. So it's fine to say, I would argue that the statement is partially true, or true in some ways, not in others. That's fine. Any conclusion is fine, as long as you say how you got there. Justifying what you say, super important. Very hard to get the higher levels of the mark scheme if you don't do that. Okay, hope that's helped. More of these coming soon when I've written some more model answers. In the meantime, take care, work hard, leave me a comment if there's something that you particularly want to request that I can help you with, and I'll see you soon.